You know, it's odd how $16,000 can completely alter your life plan. It wasn't, I don't even think it was a week that I was there when I was in class, as a matter of fact. I think I was in my math class. A call came over the intercom for me to report to my advisor's office. So I wasn't sure what that was going to be about. I was a little worried about it, actually. And so I go down there, and there's a phone number with an Ontario exchange. And Miss Taylor says, you need to call this number right away. They're trying to reach you. And I said, who's trying to reach me? And she says, I don't know, but they're from the Canadian government. And I was like, oh, this is not good. I call this number, and I'm about shitting in my pants. And when they answer the phone, the person on the other end of the phone says, this is so-and-so. You've reached the Canada Council. This is so-and-so, Canada Council. I had forgotten about this grant application. I had no idea who was calling me or why. And this person on the other end of the phone says, your application has been accepted, and we want to know how to get this money to you. And so I said, well, how much money are you giving me? And they said it's nearly $17,000, $16,600 and some dollars. I almost passed out. For one reason, like the level of poverty I had been in my whole life, literally welfare, and then pretty well living hand to mouth with, $5 an hour minimum wage jobs. I couldn't even get my head around how much money that was. And I remember hanging up the phone and like jumping so high in the room that I hit my head on the tile ceiling. And put my hand through one of the tiles by accident and hit my head on it. And I'm a tall guy anyway, but I was jumping. I jumped higher than I ever jumped in my life. So, in essence, during that one phone call, I became incredibly wealthy. Or so I felt. I was a rich man at that point. So I still remember, like, I had the lawyer, Donald Franks, had sold me an old Chevette car, a gray Chevette. It was a Standard. I'd never driven a Standard before, but I figured out how to get it. He wanted $300 for the car, but he never really pursued me to pay for it. He gave it to me right away. And I remember being in that driving down that Chevy car. I had no bank account, so they were sending me the first installment, which was about $5,500 through Western Union. So I had to drive, I don't know how many miles away, 20, 30 miles to a Western Union depot and collect this cashier's check for $5,500, which I went directly to the bank in Boonville, opened an account, a checking account, And there I was with all this money. And strange things began to happen. First of all, I became famous instantly. There were two things going on. The first thing is that they'd never had a Canadian come to this course. This curriculum was, 100% American, as far as I know. There might have been somebody from Europe that had been there, but nobody from Canada. And then there was this huge amount of money that the government had given me to go there, so I became this overnight celebrity. I was interviewed by the local papers. The television station wanted to come down and film me and all this stuff, and I ended up in the front pages of all these regional papers and these television shows, these morning television shows, and all this stuff. And I became an instant celebrity. Everybody knew who I was in a span of 3 days. This John Paul Cormier guy had come from Nova Scotia, and his government gave him all this $17,000 grant to attend the prestigious Americana music course at this college. One of the first major class trips that we did was to Nashville. Someone in Boonville had painted a picture of Minnie Pearl and her original straight man. His name was Ron Brassfield. He was a fixture on the Opry with her in the early days. He had passed on, of course, some point in time. We went up as Campus Country on a bus to Nashville, which wasn't far away. We were only 20 miles from the Tennessee state line. So we went up there to present this picture, this painting. It was a huge painting. We went up there to present this painting to Minnie Pearl on Nashville Now. So, which was taped at Opryland. So that was the first major trip we made. It was the morning we were leaving on the bus, and I had gone and taken some of this money and bought I went and bought myself a whole new wardrobe. I bought, new jeans, new shirts, boots, cowboy boots. Bought myself a brown leather blazer, bolo ties, all this bling, which wasn't a lot of money. And I mean, you got to remember something. The cost of living in 1988 or 89, whatever it was, 88, 89 in Mississippi was nothing. Gas was 60 cents a gallon. You could buy a package of cigarettes for 99 cents. The cost of living was nothing. It was just way less than it was in Canada. And frankly, it's still the same. The cost of living in the South is about half what it is here. So I had gone and bought all this bling clothes and all this stuff, and I got really obviously dressed up like a bastard for this show. Standing in the hallway, waiting to get on the bus at the college, and this girl walked up to me. I knew her. I knew everybody in the class, and I was sweet on her already. Come to find out, she was sweet on me, and we ended up. I fell head over heels for her, and that was the first moment that started to occur. That whole scenario. And we basically sort of spent the day together on the bus, at the show, back on the way back to Boonville from Nashville, and sort of just that relationship sort of got established in that 1 day trip, and we were pretty well inseparable after that. So anyhow, we go up to Nashville, and we're there for the taping of Nashville Now. So we get there, and we're watching this taping. We all met Ralph Emery, and one of the guests on the show that night was the singer-songwriter Ed Bruce. Tremendous guy. And we presented the painting and all that stuff. But during the day, there was a rehearsal, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And during the day, I was a smoker back then, of course. And during the day, I was sneaking out back of the television studio, which was sort of the back door of Opryland, and there was a smoking area out there, and you could see the pathway that led down to Roy Acuff's house. He lived right behind Opryland because he was old and he didn't want to travel. And he was the father of the Opry, at that time. And so he lived in this house. You could see the pathway and see the house. He lived right there. So that was interesting. I was out there having a smoke by myself. I think we were on sort of a lunch break or something. I had a bit of time to kill. And as I'm standing there having my smoke, this door opens a little on sort of kitty corner from where I'm standing. The side door opens up, and who walks out of this door with a guitar case in his hand? But Jerry Reed. And, I'm, 18, 19 years old, and well into Jerry. Jerry was God to me. And I recognized him. Obviously, there's no not recognizing Jerry Reed. He's only one human being in the world that looked like that. And I literally hollered over, "Hey, Jerry, how you doing, man?" And he looked up, smiled, and just started walking right for me. And I don't know what the hell precipitated that. I really don't. Because, as I've said in earlier episodes, some of the people I met who were mega famous, superstar heroes to me weren't, the best fellas in the world. But he definitely wasn't Hank Snow. So here he come, walking across, smiling, laughing, giggling at me, right? "How you doing, son?" I was like, "I'm good, Mr. Jerry. How you doing? What do you, who?" And he started asking me questions like why I was there. And he thought he might know me, I guess, is why he was checking to see who I was. And I said, "Well, I'm here with the college from Boonville, Mississippi, and we're presenting a painting to Miss Minnie Pearl tonight on the show." And Jerry goes, "Yeah, I was on the show last night." He said, "I had to come back and get my guitar." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And I said, "Well, I play a little bit of guitar." And I said, I love your playing. I play some of your music." "Do you now?" I said, which ones do you play?" And I said, "Well, I play the Claw a lot. It's one of my favorite Jerry tunes, of course." I said, "I've never been able to get the ending of it. I don't understand how that works." And he said, "You don't?" He said, "Well, if you can get through the head of it." He said, "Can you play the head of the tune?" I said, "Yeah, I got that part." He said, "Well, then you can play the ending. Here, watch this." And he set the guitar case down, and there were these kind of railroad ties that they were using for curbs. When you pull a car up, these big wooden railroad ties laying on the ground. He literally put the case down, opened up the case, got the guitar out, and sat on one of these railroad ties and looked up at me. And so I just got right in his face and straddled this railroad tie and sat down in front of him. And he started to show me how to play the ending of the Claw. On the original Baldwin, that guitar, he cut his own cutaway out of it and filled it in with wood paneling from his house. Crazy, like. So there he was, right? This man was in front of me, and I had no idea how the horseshoe got up my ass, that I was lucky enough to be sitting in this position. And he spent about 30 minutes, at least, maybe more. I don't remember how the time ceased to exist during this moment. He sat there and kept passing me the guitar, and I'd try to play it. "No, son, no, that ain't it. Well, watch now. And he sat there for all this time and worked with me. And at the end of it, I didn't have it. I had the basics of it. And he looked at me and said, "Son," said, "you're a great guitar player, and you'll have that." He said, "You just got to play it. Now that you know what it is, just play it. You'll have it. And I said, well, thank you, Mr. Jerry. And I was so in shock that later on I would meet Chet much later. That meeting was different because because I ended up, well, I'll leave that for that episode. But I was emotionally overwhelmed by what had just occurred to me, with Jerry. Like, I wanted to cry, I wanted to laugh, I just didn't know what to say to the man, right? And so he packed the guitar up, and he stood up, and I stood up, and he looked at me, and he said, "You take care of yourself now, son." And he shook my hand, and I said, "I don't know how to thank you." He said, "No problem, don't you worry. Us guitar pickers gonna stick together." And he just turned around and left me there and walked away. I don't know where he went. I don't know where he was going. And I remember watching his back as he walked away from me, and just standing there in shock. Like, I was literally in shock. I actually didn't tell anybody about this for days because it took me that long to absorb what had happened, how much generosity he had shown me. So that was definitely one of the most incredible moments of my entire life. And from there, of course, we went on. The time went on. That Christmas came, and I actually flew home for Christmas. I had a lot of money. I had a lot of money. I had moved out of the dorms. I had rented a house in town with another guy who was supposed to be, because rent was nothing. I rented a whole house for $200 a month. And I took my roommate with me. He wanted to come with me. So he was supposed to help pay the rent, but he never did. So, but I had a house. It was a nice house. It was a nice place. We had fun there. I flew home for Christmas and rented a car and spent Christmas at home with everybody. And even like going home, I was being treated different. It was weird. My brothers, Joe and Bob and Mom, and they all were treating me differently. It was like, okay, this kid has left the timeline of this family, because all my other brothers just sort of went into labor jobs and sort of stayed in the rut, right? And I had escaped. I had left the timeline of all the other brothers and siblings, and even that of my mother and father, and had escaped and gone into another country, was getting a college education. Like, nobody had ever gone to college in my family. And I was back home, and I had more money than any of them had due to this grant, and I came home, and I rented my car and had Christmas at home, flew back to Mississippi, and things just went on like that. There was it was a really good time. It was a really good time. Me and this girl were madly in love with each other. It was crazy, and her family really liked me, and she was a great singer. She was in the band, in Campus Country, and so it was just a really good time. Everything was a lot of fun. I made a lot of friends. I got to hang out with a lot of black guys down there that I love those people. They were the music that they played and that they listened to, and their sense of humor and their generosity, and I realized how much pressure they were living under, being black, and it was that part of that society really moved me, in a lot of ways, and they accepted me without question, I never encountered any kind of problem with race myself, directly interacting with someone that wasn't white. I don't know if it was just the way that I held myself, or the way I addressed them or treated them, but there just was, I never encountered anything ugly myself that had to do with me interacting with somebody who had a different skin color. It just never happened. And it never happened at all. Over the 10 years I was running in and out of that country, it just never happened. My adventures in that world would get bigger over time into some really cool stuff that happened, because I had no fear of that. Didn't believe in segregation. I didn't believe in any of those things. I treated everybody the same, and I gravitated a lot into the black community because part of me wanted to piss off the white people around me who did have racist leanings. And part of me wanted to be with them because they were downtrodden, and I wanted to be there. And it was a very emotional thing for me. After the Christmas break, things continued on as normal, but started to get to the point where I was really starting to believe my own hype. And there were tensions growing in the band because I was not pulling any punches anymore about what I thought about people's performances and how, I was making suggestions based upon the good of the music, right? Like, and that's not always the best thing to do. I wasn't considering anybody's feelings. I was just making comments and suggestions based on what I felt would make the band strongest. So sometimes that included things like, okay, well, why don't we put this guy on the rhythm guitar for this song, or why don't we do this and this, because I wasn't coming out and saying it. I want this guy to do this because he's better at it than this guy. And I wasn't saying it, but I didn't need to say it. It was implied, and it was extremely offensive. But I didn't seem to care. And at the time I wasn't consciously doing it to be an arsehole. I was doing it because I wanted the band to be the best it could be. And I didn't broach it the right way. I would just come out and say things like, okay, well, why don't we put Chip over here and this over here, and you play on this song, because and people get really offended because they knew I was a better musician than them, and that was intimidating enough, but I was not sparing their feelings when it came to, my assessment of how we were doing as a band and how they were doing as musicians. I wasn't considering anybody's feelings. I really wasn't. And there were times when I myself got agitated because I didn't like the way things were going musically. And it was clear I was agitated. And I started to scare the shit out of people. And that was sad. It was sad. Because I didn't know how to draw back out of that. Because I was a perfectionist, and I still am. I'm worse today than I was. But I take that perfectionism out on myself, not other people. I take it out of myself. I force myself to meet a standard that most people could never meet. I can't even meet it. So, and that's a problem I've had all my life, and I'll never get rid of it. I'm just a perfectionist. I don't like to do things half-assed, and when I find a formula that works, I like to stick to it, nearly forever. Change is hard for me as a musician. It isn't now. I think now, over the last 10 years, I've really opened up, into all kinds of experimental whatever. I don't care. Like, and Dave Gunning is one of my biggest heroes in that regard, who's, forced me to open my eyes a lot and look at different ways to get different things done. But in those days in the college, I only thought there was one way to get things done, and that was my way. And I'm not blaming other people, but I got to that point because of the way I was being treated. I got treated better than I should have, and more. There was just more, accolades heaped on me than were necessary, and because I came out of nothing and was so, abused as a child, I wanted acceptance, and I needed that. I needed acceptance. I needed praise. I never got any. And so I was just in this world where everything I touched turned to gold, and then eventually I would turn it back into shit because my attitude was bad. So along about this time, tensions were getting kind of high among myself and Miss Taylor and everybody in the band, and me and the girl were doing well, or so I thought. And I moved out of the house I was in and went in with got a nicer house with a bunch of other guys that I really loved. There was a pilot there. His name was Chip Kelly. He was one of the coolest guys ever, and he was just a great guy. I think he's a pilot, a captain for American Airlines now, but he was Air Force back then. There was something going on during this entire process. So after the Christmas break, up into the spring, things were going along, but I started to notice a couple things. First of all, I was getting bills from the college, and I was wondering why, because if you'll remember back to the last episode, Donald Franks said that he was going to pay for all of this. I considered my Canada Council grant my living expenses, because I wasn't able to take a job. I wasn't allowed to work in the United States legally. I wouldn't have been able to get a job without the proper papers, and I didn't have them. So I wasn't spending this $16,000, which was supposed to last me 2 years. Donald Franks said he was going to pay for the tuition, pay for everything. But I was getting bills from the bookstore and bills for tuition and it wasn't being paid. And then I was going to Donald Franks' office all the time and going, okay, how are things going with my immigration paperwork? Where is this collegiate visa? And every time I went in to see this man, he hadn't found anything else out. It was just like he was calling this politician and that politician and this office and that office, and he wasn't getting anything done. And I mean, he was a nice man. I believed he was trying to help me, but he wasn't getting it done. And now I was on the hook for all this money from the college I didn't understand. I was like, okay, so you're going to pay for what they're asking me for, right? This was the agreement. And he was like, oh, yes, don't worry about that. And it just, every single meeting we had turned out the same way. He hadn't got the collegiate visa. I was still illegal. And it really started to bother me because, again, how my love interests affected my life is really something else. I started to become very agitated about the whole situation because my girlfriend's family started to warn her that I was trying to be involved with her because I wanted to marry into a green card. I don't know where this came from. This was not something, it was probably innocently mentioned in some conversation because I obviously told her everything that was going on in my life, and I was probably telling her, well, I still don't have my papers, and I don't know what I'm going to do, and I have to leave in the summer to go back to Canada after this year is over and come back for the second year, but I still don't have any way to get back into the country, and blah blah blah. And somewhere in that conversation, I likely said the only way that there's to get this done any other way is to marry somebody, and then you get a green card. But I don't think I ever said to her, marry me so I can be legal. That was not ever spoken of. And, we were old enough to do so. I was 19 years old, and she was 18, maybe 19, maybe the same age as me. She was actually this is how fun this curriculum was. She was actually in this curriculum for the second time. She'd already passed the 2 years and was in again, just to be in the band and work with Miss Taylor and work with all these people. So somewhere along the way, her family, she must have mentioned it to her mother, and her mother and father were split up, divorced, but not good people, and they got along well. And somewhere along the way, her father, whose nickname was Bull, I think, he was a gigantic man, a businessman. You just didn't mess with this guy, I don't think. He was never mean to me. I always got along with him. But somewhere along the way, they got it in their head that I was trying to snag her to get legalized in that country. And I found out about it. And that's when I started to get, angry. I was pissed. Because it was starting to interfere with my relationship with her, and that couldn't happen. So I was going back to Donald Franks more and more frequently, and time was going on, and nothing was being done. And finally, I ended up in the dean's office one day. Called me in there to give me shit, basically. He's like, you're here and you haven't paid for anything, and this, that, and the other thing. And my megalomania kicked in. But what I was saying was actually true, but the way I said it was not flattering. He gave me all this shit about my tuition and my books and my this and my that, and I should be grateful and blah, blah, blah. And I looked at him and I said, listen, I've been here for the better part of a year. This would have been like September into June. I said, I've been in here a year. I've been playing in this band for all that time for no money. I'm a ringer in this band, and you know it. And Donald Franks hasn't paid a dime of my tuition, nor got my collegiate visa. And I appear to only be here because you guys need a fucking utility man in this band. That's why I'm here. I'm making this band look really good. And you're going to, once I'm gone, you're going to use all of that, all of that momentum to get more people signed up to this course. Which was, when I said those things, it was true. Because I didn't make any of that up. I was generating a massive amount of media for the college. None of us were being paid to do these performances. We were raising money left hand and foot, left, right, and center for the college, and nothing that Donald Franks promised me a year before that had ever been done. I was still illegal, and I still owed the college all this money. Of course, he came back with, well, your government's paid for it. I said, well, that doesn't matter. That is no part of this. That money is to keep me alive here for 2 years because I can't work because I'm not a U.S. citizen. And you know that, and Donald Frank knows that, and what are we doing about this? Is anything going to be done or not? And at that point, I told him to shove the college up his ass. And I stormed out of the office, and there was a good buddy of mine down there. His name was Gary Ray. He was a tremendous musician. He had a band called Magic. It was spelled Majik. And I had started playing with them. He said, we should just both leave this place and let's just go down and work the band, and we'll get famous, right? And I believed that. I thought, yeah, hell yeah, we could get this band to Nashville, no problem, because we could. It was a great band. And so I had this huge blow up with the dean, but I didn't actually leave the college. I kept going to class. I didn't know how long any of this was going to last because of the blow up I had with the dean. Kept going back to Donald Franks with no results. We were no closer to getting a visa or any of those things. And finally, I got a letter one day. It was from the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and it was a deportation note. So the deportation letter, it was an order, a deportation order. I was to report I was either to leave the country on my own free will or report to a certain place and be picked up and flown home. And if I didn't show up at any of these things, the U.S. Marshal would be coming to arrest me and take me out of the country. That was the order. So, of course, I went directly to my girlfriend at the time, and I was in tears. And I just said, they're throwing me out. They're taking me out. They're coming to get me. She had no answer. I had a little bit of time until this all was going to go down. And along about that time, I remember it was interesting. The Sullivan family came to Boonville to play. And so Enoch got a hold of me and said, would you like to play with us? And I was like, absolutely. And so we're playing the same hall that I got discovered in by Donald Franks, and they came and did a concert, and I played with them. And while I was, just before the show was starting, I was out in the front of the building having a cigarette, and my girlfriend rolled up and just said, it's over. We can't do this anymore. She said, I love you with all my heart, but you belong in there with them. That's where you really belong, with that class of musician. And this will never work because, you need to go back on the road and do what you do. This is not where you belong. And she really believed that. I could see it in her eyes. She was breaking up with me, but she was telling me something that I needed to hear. She said, and she told me right to my face. She said, this isn't about me not loving you. This is about you don't belong here. You never have belonged here. And you need to get out of here and go do what you should be doing. You need to be touring. You need to be with musicians who are that you can learn from, and on it goes. And that's, so she left me. There I was, standing in the lobby with a deportation order in my pocket, waiting to go on stage with Enoch and Margie and Emmett. And so I played the show, and I took this breakup pretty badly. And I stayed on there for a bit afterwards. And, I hung out with some of my close friends like Shane Starling. I hung out with him. They lived close to the college, and I spent a lot of time with him and with his father and mother, trying to figure out what to do. And eventually, the date got closer and closer that they were coming for me, and I waited until the last day before this date on this order, and I made one last visit to the college. I went to the college, and they were rehearsing for something, And I remember going in the building, me and Gary Ray was with me. He was, we went in, we kind of told Miss Taylor, you know, we're out, we're done. And of course she was heartbroken. She didn't want to lose me or Gary, either one of us, from the course and the band and all that. And she was a little bit angry and a lot hurt. And of course, me and Gary at that point were about the same level of ego. We thought we had the world by the balls, and I was, you know, pretty well escaping, fleeing the law and everything else. Felt like real outlaws, you know, like, oh, I'm badass. And so we walked out of the whole situation, and people, the band, nobody in the band understood what was going on and why we were doing what we're doing, and it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. And the day came when I was faced with, you know, being deported. And the day before, I packed everything I had in the Chevette and I ran. I got in the car and I drove from Boonville, Mississippi, back down to St. Stephen's, Alabama, to Enoch's house. And the next morning, the U.S. Marshal showed up to pick me up. I called up and talked to Chip Kelly and said, "Did they come?" And he said, "Yeah, they came here, but we didn't tell them where you are." And so that was the end of my college days. I went back down with Enoch and Margie, and I went back on the road with them, and I spent the rest of that summer and well into the fall before I finally decided to go back home. But it was an interesting time of my life, and so many things happened, like just so many things happened. It's so hard to tell this story in one big chunk. I will probably be revisiting parts of this entire story as I move forward, because there's just no way to recall and remember and everything. So it was a year and a bit that I spent in that world. And it altered everything. It was one of the best times of my entire life, and it was also one of the hardest. The way that it ended and the way that I ended up being through that year was not good. I got way above my raisin, and going back to Enoch's kind of put that behind me. I got humble again around them because, well, you just couldn't be any other way around people like that, because they'd have just cut you down to size and no problem at all. But nobody was around to do that for me for about a year and a half, and yeah, I got well out of control, I can tell you that. The one good thing about all of it is, I met Jerry Reed. I met Jerry Reed.